Welcome to Dear Parents. This is going to be a podcast where I'm able to talk in greater depth about the things that are on parents' minds. Social media is great for the short form videos where it's like one little nugget of information, but I don't find that a lot of parents are able to take that little bit of information in the vast sea of information and actually make changes or get the comfort or the reassurance or the peace of mind or the context that actually helps them in their day-to-day as parents. And so what this podcast will do is allow us to go deeper on the topics that are relevant to parents. This will be on my Substack, Dear Parents, and if you have questions, the easiest way to get your specific questions answered is just go to dearparents.substack.com, check it out, join us, get your questions answered on the podcast or on the Dear Parents Substack so that you can get the information that actually helps you in the moment when you are parenting. Now, today there's three things that we're going to talk about. First, we're going to talk about starting solid foods because this is a common question and concern and an area where it can be really overwhelming for parents. Second is we're going to talk about responses to rage, those raging episodes that we see in our toddlers and in our big kids too, but it's often kind of in that 2 to 8 year range where we have a lot of rage, and it often as parents can be very difficult for us to help our toddlers and our elementary school kids when they're in that moment where it's fight or flight, where it's big emotions, where it's throwing the remote control, throwing the shoes, those sorts of things. And so that's the second thing we're going to talk about. And then the third is going to be talking about the new vaccine schedule and what that actually means for parents that have questions or are unsure what to think at this moment. So hopefully this is helpful today. We're going to hop right into it. All right, so the first thing that we're going to talk about today is starting solid foods because this is a common question and it's so common for parents to just feel completely overwhelmed by starting solid foods because there's just so much information out there. I take this from an evolutionary lens. If we think way back to the caveman and cave woman, cave mom, cave dad days, when I know that parents weren't fighting dinosaurs, like the timelines didn't quite overlap, but I like to think of it in those terms of a parent is out in prehistoric days and they are looking for food for their growing toddler. They're going to find a strawberry patch and then they're going to happen upon some green beans and then they're going to happen upon some squash. They're going to feed the baby what's available and what's safe. They aren't going to put all these rules in place. It's not like the cave mom is slapping the squash that they've prepared out of the baby's mouth or out of the dad's hand saying, oh, yesterday we had strawberries, so we have to do 3 days of strawberries. We have to go back to that strawberry patch where there was a saber-toothed tiger because we have to do it for 3 days. No, they're going to feed baby what's available. And so when I look at the big picture of this, I try and remind parents that babies have been eating for a long time, and you're not going to mess it up in all the ways that the anxiety industry has tried to make it seem like it's really complicated, and buy my book and buy my course and buy my this, that, the other thing, or you're going to mess it up. When it comes to starting solid foods, there's no right way to start them and there's no wrong way to start them. I'm going to work through and just talk through specifically when people start, what they start with, and then talk a little bit about allergens. Now, there's no perfect age for starting solid foods, and you're not going to miss it if you are planning a vacation or you're sick or something along those lines. There's not this perfect window that you have to get solid foods started within. I always talk about starting solid foods at the 4-month visit because most parents start sometime between 4 and 6 or 4 and 7 months, and I like to prepare them in advance just a little bit for that. There are some readiness cues that I talk with parents about rather than a specific, they have to be this many weeks old or this many months old or something along those lines. First and foremost is they have to be able to sit up. Now, that doesn't mean you just plop them down and they're able to sit and hold themselves up completely. A lot of babies won't do that until 6 or 7 months in general, and sometimes a little bit later even. But if they can sit on parents' lap or if they can sit in a high chair and not just topple over, then that's a good sign. The other big sign that parents notice is the baby takes an interest in the parents eating. Maybe they're trying to make grabs for that spoon or fork, or they're really watching you eat. That's a good sign. The tongue thrust reflex that is normal for babies, that usually starts to diminish around that age, and that helps so that they will actually not just reflexively thrust their tongue out when anything comes near it. And then bringing objects to the mouth. Those are the good signs. And there's no like perfect hard signs, but those are the soft signs that tell me that it's fine to try. Now, what should you start with? This is a huge question. And way back in the day when I first started in practice, there were these sheets that were in all caps, and you have to do it this specific way. It has to be yellow before orange and fruit before vegetables and 3 days or 5 days of single isolates only. All of that stuff does not fit with our evolutionary perspective that I shared a moment ago when it comes to eating, and it is very rigid and formulaic and does not fit with what we know about starting solid foods and the nutrition and the science around that. So you can just throw any of those papers that you might have or those old mindsets out the window. You don't have to start with something in particular. You don't have to keep doing the same thing for a certain number of days. You don't have to only offer one thing to watch for allergies or something along those lines. Those are all made up rules that just make it harder and more anxiety provoking and don't improve safety or food tolerance or anything along those lines. If you want to start with fruits before vegetables, you can. If you want to start with meats before fruits, you can. If you want to do oatmeal, or if you want to start with green beans or peaches or pears, no problems. Now, between 4 and 6 months, if we're starting solid foods, most people will start with purees just because that gag reflex is still developing or tuning down enough. And parents will want to start with like putting something on a spoon and putting it in baby's mouth. And that is perfectly fine. There's this whole like puree camp versus baby-led weaning camp, and it's a complete false dichotomy that's just been made up to try and make it seem like if you don't do exactly what I say, you're going to mess things up. The majority of patients that I have taken care of do both. They will typically start, if they start between 4 and 6 months, with some purees. They might make them themselves. They might get some from the grocery store or Target or Walmart or wherever, or online, and start baby with purees, and that's perfectly fine. You can make your own too. There's plenty of good recipes to make your own of in-season fruits and vegetables and meats and things along those lines that you can make your own purees, or you can get them off the shelf. Now, at this age, it's for fun, for new flavors, and for new textures. So it's not a nutritional source that is going to outweigh or make up for breast milk or formula or whatever baby is drinking on a regular basis. This is for fun. And so I always tell parents, like, it's okay if you miss a day. If the evening is busy and you don't get around to it, not a big deal, because their nutrition is coming from the milk that they drink rather than from the food. But it is still something fun to do. I think most people, when they're starting with purees, will do it at dinner time. Somehow some people say that they do it at breakfast time. I have no idea how anyone has that kind of time in the morning to do that. But most people will do it at dinner time. It's something fun. You get some pictures. You send them to loved ones of the messy baby with the stuff all over their face. You get some videos and those sorts of things. And it's just a fun way to try something new, to see what your baby likes, everything along those lines. Now, when it comes, so that's purees. Most people will shift from puree. If they're starting with purees, they'll shift between 6 and 7, 8 months to doing more baby-led weaning solids anyways. And so if you're going to say, I don't want to do purees, I want to start with baby-led weaning, most people start that around 6 to 7 months. And you just start with things that baby can pick up and mash on. The big picture is that we're giving them finger-sized foods that are not choking hazards, that they will put in their mouth and they will gum up and chew on. And so what we'll often see are cooked items, like you could even do, people like to get a picture of a baby gnawing on a piece of steak. I don't know if I would start with that just because it's an expensive cut of meat to give to a baby that's probably just going to chew on it and spit it out. But a lot of people will do avocados or cut bananas or things along those lines. And that's a great way to expose your baby to new flavors and new textures and get them practice with putting something to their mouth that is not a choking hazard. And so that is what people typically start with if they're starting with baby-led weaning. Now, one of the things where people get hung up, parents are often get hung up on, is this idea that it has to be very rigid and we have to do it in a specific order. I've seen lots of programs that parents will buy where it's like these 100 different food items that we're going to try, and you're going to 3 different grocery stores to try to find star fruit so that on day 42 you try star fruit. You don't know how to prepare it. It's not in season. It's not a local thing. I encourage parents to save their money and focus on the foods that you eat or the foods that you would like to eat, rather than getting into the weeds of, on day 42, our program that we're doing says star fruit, so I got to go to Whole Foods and I got to go to the farmer's market and try and find this star fruit. I have no idea how to prepare it. That adds anxiety without any sort of benefit to the baby or to the parents. And it just makes it a hassle, and it makes feeding feel like it's a chore rather than something fun. Focus on the foods that you like to eat or that you would like to eat on a regular basis if you're still working on your nutrition and food choices and all those sorts of things. But you don't have to go out of your way to fill in some sort of chart that says, yes, we tried this really obscure thing that we will never eat because it's expensive or hard to find or not in season or not local. Instead, just focus on enjoying meal preparation and meal time, and that will be borne out in the way that you approach meals with your child rather than the stress of trying to figure out how to cook star fruit at 6:30 so that you can prepare it for your baby so you can mark it off on the chart. Now, when it comes to feeding frequency, between 4 and 6 months, it's usually just for fun, once per day, occasionally. You might miss a day or miss a week because of business or travel or all the other things in life that come up. Usually between 6 and 8 months, it's once per day, at typically a dinner time or whenever you can sit down and have the time to get messy and prepare something and clean up from it. Between 9 and 12 months, it usually goes to 2 times per day or up to 3 times per day. And then by 12 months, most babies are having 3 meals per day where they're sitting in their chair at the table and they're eating 3 meals per day and then having snacks throughout the day. That's the big picture. Now, when it comes to allergens, that's the last thing that I want to touch on here, is that in the past, pediatricians and public health experts did a really bad job with the way that peanut was approached. It was no peanut till 1, no peanut until 2, and that caused a lot of peanut allergies because we know there's actually a critical window when it's important that baby is exposed to peanut to protect against peanut allergy. And so what we've learned, and our science has changed, and so our guidance has changed, that now we know that early frequent introduction of peanut protects against peanut allergy. Now, some kids get peanut allergy no matter what we do, but we can dramatically lower the risk of peanut allergy and the frequency of peanut allergy by early exposure. So I tell parents, and certainly, obviously, this is something you're going to talk to your doctor with, especially if your baby has underlying severe eczema or is otherwise prone to allergies for the reasons that you should talk with your doctor about. But we start peanut around 6 months of age and make sure we're introducing it on a regular basis, multiple times per week or at least weekly to protect against allergy. Typically, if people are doing purees, I'll just tell them to throw some peanut butter into the puree. It'll thicken it up a little bit, stir it up. It's probably, you're going to put it into something that tastes good with peanut butter added to it, so probably not green beans, but maybe sweet potatoes or oatmeal or something along those lines that you're doing, and that's how you get them regular peanut exposure. You don't have to get into the weeds of this many grams of peanut per week or something like that. That is way too nuanced for practical everyday purposes. If you're intentionally doing it a couple times per week, great. Egg is the same. There are studies that show that egg introduction helps protect against egg allergy. And so what I typically tell parents to do in that case is you scramble some eggs or you fry some eggs, and if you're doing purees, you chop them into really fine bites, put it into the puree, give it in the puree. Otherwise, if they're doing baby-led weaning, you can take those scrambled eggs, you can put them on their plate. Some of them will make them to their mouth. If you want to fry an egg and just cut it into strips and let baby work on it that way, those are great ways to get those allergens exposed. Now, it's good in general to expose to lots of different foods, but those are the two in particular that have the strongest evidence that active, intentional integration of those into your baby's diet helps protect. Now, in the big picture, I want starting solid foods and feeding your baby to be fun. And so I always try and encourage parents to stop for a moment before you get worried about it or you feel a lot of pressure around it, and figure out what is going to feel good and how it's going to work in your schedule, how it's going to work into your daily rhythms and routines so that we can enjoy it. And it feels like a chance to come together, connect, have some fun, make a little bit of a mess, and move on from that. One of the big questions that parents ask is like, how do I get my baby to not throw their food off their tray? They're 7 or 8 months old. Instead of eating, they're just throwing all their food and it's making a huge mess. And this is like one of the first opportunities where I get to talk to parents about what you shine light on more of. What you give attention to, you get more of. If it's, oh no, don't do that, or oh my gosh, let's pick that up, or please don't do that, or loud voices and lots of attention when it comes to throwing food, or the dog is grabbing it and eating it, or something along those lines, you're going to see more of that because everybody likes attention, especially babies. And so if you make a small deal out of it instead of a big deal out of it, or you just ignore it, you will see less of it. And this is a really good just first opportunity to introduce that concept to parents. There's only two things that I want you to take away as things to not do. One is to give honey to babies under 12 months of age. Honey can have botulism spores in it. You and I ingest honey, we get those spores, our immune system in our gut just takes care of them. Not a big deal. In infants under 12 months of age, there's a higher risk that those spores can germinate and your baby can actually get botulism because the immune system can't destroy those spores just yet. And so under 12 months of age, no honey. And then the other one is just choking hazards. Obviously, you're going to watch for choking hazards, things like hot dog rounds or whole grapes or peanuts or popcorn or things along those lines. We're not going to give those to baby because of the risk of choking. And lastly, that's another thing that often comes up is parents are worried about choking versus gagging. How do I tell the difference? In the big picture, this is something that we always talk through with parents, is gagging is loud. And it's, they're gagging, they're trying to work something up, and you just let gagging play out. You rush over to them, of course, when you hear it. You might even try patting their back or something like that, but really you don't need to do any of that. They will work out the gagging. Choking is silent. And so if it's silent, if they are not moving air, it's going to be silent. They're not able to get air out. And then we're going to do the back blows, the Heimlich-like maneuver for babies that you will hopefully learn, or at least after doing this, check out YouTube or something like that to find how to do that so that you're prepared for that. Gagging is common, choking is uncommon. Gagging is not serious and goes away on its own and babies work through it. Choking is serious and needs our immediate attention. So those are the big pictures when it comes to the things to watch for. Hopefully this has been helpful. If you have other questions about starting solid foods or anything along those lines, go to the Dear Parents page on Substack and leave your question there. We can cover it in an upcoming video, or I can respond to your comment. A lot of what we do in pediatrics is long game stuff. Certainly kids feel better tomorrow when we get their strep throat treated, but often we don't get to see the results of our preventative work in the day-to-day lives of our patients, which is why, to be honest with you, I love teaching and helping parents of kids with ADHD. You get to see month-by-month improvement as you put more strategies into place, and parents actually see and brag about the positive changes that they are seeing day by day. One of the tools that we've developed to help is the ADHD Profile and Compass. It's an online assessment parents complete that looks at your child's ADHD across the 4 main domains of ADHD. Everyone knows about hyperactivity and inattention, but often neglected are emotional regulation and executive functioning. When we get that full 4-domain picture and we see your child's ADHD profile, we can then put actual strategies in place across all the different domains and see much bigger improvement than simply focusing on suppressing their hyperactivity and increasing their ability to focus for task completion. If you're looking to understand your child's ADHD better, check out my ADHD Compass. The link is in the show notes, and I promise you'll learn so much about your child's ADHD and how to help your child thrive. All right, now let's turn our attention to those big emotions that we experience with our toddlers and our elementary school kids. What I often hear from parents is that their toddler is having a moment and they want to help. They want to help them through the moment, but they don't know how. They don't want to do it where it's the big matching their big voice or sending them to timeout, or on the opposite extreme of the pendulum is just doing nothing. Like, we need our toddlers and our elementary school kids to learn how to handle their emotions and handle how they're feeling and when they're upset and frustrated. We want them to be able to have those feelings, but we want to have them be regulated and safe and not throw the remote or the shoes or break the things or storm off. We want to help them through that moment. And I hear that a lot. One of the most common times that it comes up is transitions. If our child is just doing what they like and gets to keep doing what they like, then they usually don't just throw their shoes at you. But it's in those moments of, hey, it's time to go. Hey, we got to turn off Frozen. Hey, we need to get out the door. Hey, it often starts with, hey, we need to do this, that, or the other thing. And I know that you're doing something that you like, and we need to change to a non-preferred activity. Now, my first big picture thing that I always tell parents is stop looking at this as defiance and look at it as development. This is something that we're still developing the capacity to handle. As an adult, there are times when I want to keep doing something. And yes, I don't throw my shoes at people when they tell me, hey, you can't do that anymore. You got to get going, or you got to move on, or we got to go to the next thing. But I can understand why somebody that doesn't have the full prefrontal cortex, that doesn't have the experience of handling disappointment and frustration, might throw their shoes. And so I really try and encourage parents to not look at it as defiance, but look at it as a developmental skill that we are still building. In the big picture, the biggest thing that I want you to take away is that you cannot regulate a dysregulated child if you are dysregulated. If you, in the moment, are feeling those big emotions, if you're using your big voice, if you're using your big body language, you are not regulated, and you cannot get a child to regulate in that moment. So what I tell parents is, first and foremost, let's assume this is not an emergency. There's not an active safety concern. They're not pummeling their sibling. They're not running into traffic or something like that. They are upset, but this is not an emergency. So let's treat it as not an emergency. And instead of reacting with our big voice to try and quell things immediately, let's slow down. Let's lower our voice. It's instinctive of us. It's instinctual of us to raise our voice to match and try and overwhelm with volume. But instead, what brings more regulation and actually helps your child to get under control better is a quiet voice. Lowering our voice actually helps because it makes them have to tune in to, what did they say? I was expecting them to be screaming, and they're actually using a quieter voice. That helps your child to rein in, wait, what did I just hear there? Or what is being said? I need to calm my voice so I can actually hear what's going on. Instead of overwhelming them with lots of words, we're going to use fewer words. When they're in the moment, when their brain is on fire, when they are in the red brain and they aren't able to handle things, explaining to them in a rational way all of the reasons why it's time to go doesn't work. Kids cannot hear that, understand that, or understand the logic of, I told you 17 minutes ago that you had 17 minutes left, and now we have to turn off Frozen because it's time to go, and I warned you about this. They're not in a place to hear those things right now, and you as a parent are probably in a place where someone, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's a coworker, was trying to explain to you why they did what they did, but you are upset, you're angry, you're hurt, and you're not in the mental space of, hey, let me explain to you why I did what I did. Instead, it's the, hey, I hear you and I hear you're upset. Let's start there and work from there. And then using a calm body and our calm nervous system. So that looks like if our shoulders are tense, loosening our shoulders. If that looks if our face is scrunched up because we're angry, softening our face. If we can just pause for 1 to 3 seconds to do those things, to lower our voice, to consider using fewer words, to calm our body, and then show up for our raging child, you will see things improve dramatically quicker. It won't be on the first time. It'll be on the 5th or 6th time that we go through this. But luckily, or unluckily, we have many opportunities to help and practice this because our child will tell us many times throughout the day and week that, hey, I'm upset, so here's a chance to practice. So even if it goes wrong the first 3 or 4 times that you do it, just keep going and you'll eventually see a positive improvement. Now, I want to give you an anchor for when we're trying to remember in the moment, because in the moment it's hard to remember, and I like acronyms. When I was in medical school, when I was in training, we had a lot of things to memorize. And so acronyms were a great way to remember things and then quickly forget them. And my hope is that this acronym actually sticks with you and you keep it, and it helps to remind you when you're in the moment. I have talked about this a lot, and I have a workshop called Moving Through Meltdowns where I've worked with hundreds of parents on putting this into place, and have heard from a lot of parents that it works really well. It's just like the mental, okay, what am I supposed to do? And then what am I supposed to do? And what am I supposed to do? The link for Moving Through Meltdowns, the workshop, is in the show notes, and it's in my Dear Parents Substack, so you can find it there if you want to go through that. But the acronym is LEAP. LEAP. And so it's L for listen. Listen means not just the words, but also the body language that your child is sharing and the context. Okay, so you're listening for what they're telling you. You may have anticipated that. I know they always lose their marbles when we have to go. And so I'm listening to that and anticipating that routine, and I'm hearing that. But I'm also seeing their body language. They are stomping, or they are shutting down, or they are screaming with their body that they're in need of something. And then I'm also listening for the context, because I know my child and I know what they've been through today, and I know what's on their mind, and I know what's on their heart, and I can tell when they haven't eaten recently. I can tell when they're thirsty. I can tell when they're tired, and I can tell when they're disconnected. The context of the child actually makes a big difference. And so that's part of the listening is, okay, it's right after school and they're melting down, and I asked them something to do something, and I didn't consider that they hadn't had a snack since lunchtime, and they're probably dehydrated, or I just asked them to do this thing and they were on their screens, and I know right after screens it's much more difficult for them to regulate. And so perhaps I need to turn off the screens and then make the request instead of trying to lump them together. That's part of the context. So that's listening. So L is listen. E is empathize. Empathize doesn't mean that you say, yeah, I get it. You have every right to be angry, and I would be angry too. Empathize means, okay, cut that last little bit out. Empathize. Okay, the next letter is E, which is empathize. Listen, empathize. With empathizing, what you're doing is you're showing your child that you get it. You might not agree with their emotions, but you get it. You get that they're frustrated. You're validating, hey, I can see that you're angry. That doesn't mean it's just, but I get that's where you're at right now. You're angry, you're upset, you're sad, you're mad, you're whatever you are. I get it, and I see that. This is validating. It's not saying that it was okay for you to throw the remote and break the TV, but you are saying, hey, I get it, and I see that you're upset. So there's a difference there, but it's an important difference to make them feel understood. So we're going to listen, then we're going to empathize, and then we're going to acknowledge the problem. So this is acknowledging that there is a problem and that it's a shared problem rather than you're the problem kid. There's a problem. The problem is you wanted to keep watching Frozen, but it's time for us to go. The problem is you were playing with your Legos and your brother knocked them over. Rather than the problem is you and your behavior or you and your attitude, the problem is whatever contributed to where we're at now, and we can acknowledge that's a problem. So we're going to listen, we're going to empathize, we're going to acknowledge the problem, and then we're going to propose a solution. Now, P is propose a solution, not problem solve. You don't have to solve their problems for them, but you can help them to move through whatever that problem is. So what this looks like in the big picture, let's just do an example, is it's time to go and your child is watching Frozen. And you say, oh, we got to go. I got to turn off Frozen. And they lose it. They're throwing their shoes. They're screaming. They're crying. Oh, man. I get it. You're upset. You wanted to keep watching Frozen, didn't you? This was the part that I love when Olaf is singing the song about summer. I like that part. Isn't that kind of a silly part? Now, right there, what I did was probably a little bit too many words. And so I would probably pare down the words, actually, and just say something like, I love when Olaf is singing about summer, don't you? Something along those lines is just enough to make them feel like you heard and understood. Now, what we've done here is we've told them that we get it. And then from there, we can acknowledge that the problem is you wanted to keep watching, but we got to get going. We got to get to school. So what we've done there is we've listened to them. We've heard what's going on. We've emphasized. We've acknowledged the problem. And then we're going to propose a solution. Hey, we do have to get going, but do you want to listen to the summer song in the car, or should we listen to K-pop Demon Hunters, or whatever it might be that you want them to listen to in the car? You're going to propose a solution that helps them to bridge forward. And then we can move on. And we might have to help our child continue to move on, but we've made them feel heard. We've made them feel understood. We've proposed a solution. They might not accept those solutions, but those are those solutions that we're going to propose. Now, what else you're going to do in the moment of these difficult things is look at the context of, okay, they didn't have a snack. So of course I should anticipate that they're much more likely to throw a shoe or whatever version of lose their cool because they are dehydrated, because they are hungry, because they've been on screens for too long, because they're feeling disconnected and those sorts of things. So what we can do is offer those things. Hey, you know what? I forgot about snack time. Do you think that maybe a snack would help right now? Let's go over and get a snack together. Or are you thirsty? You haven't had much to drink this afternoon. Let's go get a drink. We're going to, in those moments, try and help them to bridge through rather than, hey, you got to keep it together, kid, or you can't do that, or you can't talk to me like that. Those are things that we can feel, but that those are not helpful to share in that moment. They might be helpful to share later, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But in the moment, seeking justice, explaining your rationale, or getting an apology or them to understand why you're right and they're wrong isn't going to help them to move through that difficult moment. Now, what we can do after, time has passed, we've moved on. We can, as parents, think about what the triggers were. Why did that go south? I had told them like 20 minutes ago that we were going to turn Frozen off shortly. I got distracted. I had to return an email, or I had to make my other kid breakfast or something along those lines. Time caught up with me. Okay, that's understandable. That happens. But here's how next time we can avoid that happening again. And so let's instead focus on what are those triggers. The trigger was they weren't really anticipating that I was going to turn Frozen off right at that moment, because I had warned them like 20 minutes ago. And to a 5-year-old, 20 minutes can be a lot of time or a little bit of time. It's not entirely clear. So next time I'll try and give them a little bit more of a heads up of, hey, when this song is over, we're going to get going. Or we've got time for one more Bluey episode, and then we're going to turn it off. And so that's what we're going to do after the storm, is identify those triggers, and then we're going to circle back with our child. Not to punish them and say, hey, earlier you got upset and threw your shoe at me, and so here's the punishment that you're going to undergo. You can instill a consequence if you like there, but I would start with circling back with curiosity of, hey, you were really upset earlier. Do you remember when you got upset and you threw your shoe? And it went right past my head and it almost hit me. What were you feeling then? And then pause and let them share what they were upset about. What was your body telling you then? And then let them share. And then let's proactively come up with a future solution that's going to look better. Okay, next time you're really angry, should we throw our shoe again? And they're going to say no, because they know that wasn't the right response. That was just the response they got because they were unprepared for their body and their brain being so red-brained. What can we do next time when we're upset like that? And what can I do as the parent to help it go more smoothly next time? How about this? How about I let you know when there's only one song left? How about I let you know when we're on our last Bluey episode? We can collaborate together and see an improvement in our child's behavior. That doesn't mean we have to excuse what they did before, but we can figure out how to work through it so that next time things go smoother. Now, not every meltdown requires a consequence. You can use a consequence of, hey, since you got so upset earlier, what I think we need to do is cut back on the number of Bluey episodes we're watching, because I think it might have contributed because we watched 4 Bluey episodes in a row. So next time we're going to just do fewer episodes, or we're going to take a break from Bluey for today, and we'll come back to that tomorrow. That might be the consequence. Discipline is teaching skills, not demanding obedience. As we learn more skills, we're able to move through those difficult moments more easily. And keeping in mind that our long-term goal is not compliance, but is regulation. I can handle the ups and downs. I can live within the boundaries that my parents have thoughtfully set out for me, for my safety, for my development, for our family. I can live within those boundaries, and then we're not constantly trying to come up with more and more consequences that we have to try and then get our child to participate in. We can instead say, hey, here's the boundaries. When we step outside the boundaries, we figure out how to get back into the boundaries. And from there, we can figure out how to regulate and to stay in those boundaries. And then, over time, those boundaries can expand. Okay, hopefully this was helpful. I know I meandered a little bit at the end there. Okay, hopefully this was helpful and gave you a sense of, okay, here's what I can do next time my child is having a difficult moment, because they're going to have difficult moments every day, and I can help them to work through that. I can be the regulated anchor for them, and I can use LEAP, listen, empathize, acknowledge the problem, propose a solution to help. Now, if you want more help, check out my Substack. There's a workshop called Moving Through Meltdowns that really walks through in a little bit more depth with a lot more scenarios and situations where we put it into practice so you can see how it could work in the situations that affect your daily life. Offloading your brain and turning down the noise makes a huge difference when it comes to overwhelm. We teach this to kids all the time, especially those that struggle with attention, anxiety, sustained focus, those sorts of things. But I hear from so many parents that they really struggle with keeping all the plates spinning, and it often falls to one parent to be the knowledge keeper, which is why we at our house love our Skylight calendar. It's positioned right in the highest traffic area, and it lets us as parents and our kids be on the same page. What's going on this week schedule-wise, what are we eating, and more. Our kids love putting their chores on there, and then they go over and they do check the little box when they've completed them, and they get this nice little dopamine hit. It automatically starts a slideshow of pictures when it's not in use, so we get to see family memories and moments all day long. Right now, you can get 15% off your Skylight by using code Dr. Boucher, DRBOUCHER, at checkout. The link and the code are in the show notes. Okay, now one of the things that I'm getting lots of questions about online and in clinic is vaccines. The science hasn't changed, but we got a lot of new recommendations in January about vaccines, and it's caused a lot of confusion. And I've just been asked a lot about like what are practices doing? What's my practice doing? What's my professional take on things? Are we going to lose access to vaccines? What's the scoop here? Now, as a pediatrician, I have seen vaccine preventable illnesses in my practice, in my training, and I want parents and children to avoid unnecessary harm. I also know that it is normal to have a lot of questions, and it would be unusual if, despite the mountain and the fire hose of information that parents are getting on an hourly basis right now across social media and traditional media and friends and the lady in the checkout line at the grocery store, you're getting bombarded with so much information. Of course, parents have questions, and having questions doesn't make you anti-vaccine or anti-science or anything along those lines. And I think we, as trusted health professionals, have a lot of making up for just counting on people to do what we said in the past, that now it's requiring us to just spend more time talking with patients, building up that trust, answering those questions, sharing what we know and what we don't know, and then making informed decisions together. And so I think both of those things can live in peace and harmony of it's okay to have questions. It's okay to need to work on rebuilding trust. Vaccines are safe, and I want to protect children from vaccine preventable illnesses and focus on providing education and empowerment rather than pressure or coercion. Now, one of the things that changed is these risk-based recommendations. And the biggest problem that I have when it comes to risk-based recommendations is we don't know who is at high risk for most of these illnesses. I'm going to use the example of RSV. RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, is a virus that circulates in the wintertime. You and I, as adults, get it, and we have a stuffy nose and a cough and go on with our normal day. Infants and the elderly are at higher risk for significant difficulties with RSV, especially when it comes to breathing and hydration. RSV is the number one cause of hospitalization in children because it's hard for kids that his nose is stuffed and their lungs get fluid on them to keep up with breathing and oxygen and hydration. And so they end up in the hospital. It's the number one cause of hospitalization. Now, a couple of years ago, there was a new monoclonal antibody, so not actually a vaccine, but the actual antibodies that we give to babies that has dramatically reduced the rate of RSV hospitalization by like 80% which is huge when in years past, a decade ago, when we had a big RSV outbreak, I was calling from hospital to hospital around the region just to find a bed to put kids that were having difficulty with breathing. And we were sending them 3 or 4 hours away by car or, well, by ambulance or by helicopter to get just a bed for oxygen and hydration and those sorts of things, because we would have such bad winters with RSV that the hospitals would be completely full. We've reduced that dramatically with RSV antibody treatment, the Beyfortus, for those infants. It's dramatically reduced that just by having that anti-RSV antibody on board for that first RSV season, protect them, keep them from being hospitalized. Now, the issue is if we're going to say it's risk-based, well, who's at high risk? Well, the obvious ones that we know are kids that are premature or have lung disease or heart disease or neurological disease or something like that. The problem is the majority of kids that get hospitalized with RSV are otherwise healthy, and we can't predict even age-wise who's going to have the difficult time. We've had plenty of patients in our practice that are 3 weeks old, that are 6-week-olds, that are 12-week-olds, that you think would be the tiny babies that are at highest risk. They get RSV, they have a stuffy nose, they keep nursing or bottle feeding straight through it, no problem. They've got a stuffy nose, their parents get it sucked out every day for 5 or 6 days, and they get back to normal. We've had 9-month-old, 11-month-old. These are big babies that, can stand up and walk and tell you what they think about things, that are hospitalized on invasive or non-invasive ventilation, like getting extra air into their lungs, oxygen requirements, IV fluids, all those sorts of things. So a 3-week-old does fine through RSV. An 11-month-old ends up in the ICU with RSV. We don't know how to predict who is going to have the bad difficulty with that is going to require hospitalization. So we can't actually risk stratify in a way that actually helps protect the patients in front of us from both an individual child and from a public health point of view. Rotavirus is another example of one where rotavirus, you used to be able to go onto the pediatric ward at the hospital and smell when there was a rotavirus outbreak, because they would be completely full of these dehydrated kids on IV fluids because they just can't keep up with all the vomiting and diarrhea. Rotavirus has essentially been eliminated in our country, and it's reduced the rotavirus burden and hospitalization need that we don't see on a regular basis at all. Children getting hospitalized for dehydration anymore because of that. Before that, there was like 70,000 hospitalizations each year in the United States from rotavirus, and that's not even, and it's not even a shot. It's a liquid drink that you take that creates those rotavirus antibodies in the gut where they're needed to protect from getting exposed to rotavirus from a sibling or anything along those lines. We just don't see rotavirus hospitalizations anymore because of that. And so universal recommendations protect from the unpredictability that comes from not knowing who's going to have a difficult time with any given illness. Stratifying these patients puts the burden on the parents or on the pediatrician to assess a risk that we don't actually know. And most parents assume, my baby's at low risk. If they weren't in the NICU or something like that, they must be at low risk. Well, we don't actually know that. And I can't even predict when parents tell me, hey, we got exposed to RSV, my baby has a stuffy nose. I can't give them reassurance based on, well, your baby is this old or your baby has this or that or the other thing. Who's going to have a difficult time with that RSV? It's mostly for RSV. If they haven't had the RSV antibodies, the mom didn't have the RSV vaccine during pregnancy, anything along those lines, it's okay, well, we'll wait and see, get their nose cleaned out, and day 3 or 4 will tell us in what direction we're going. Now, having said all that, our practice policy since I started my practice is we do not have a vaccine requirement. There's nothing that says you have to sign up. If you're going to join our practice, you have to take these specific vaccines, sign on the dotted line, or get out. We don't have those rigid vaccine requirements, specifically because we want to be able to have that conversation with parents so that they feel comfortable with their healthcare clinic team understanding where they're coming from. The majority of the patients in our practice, probably 87% of patients, vaccinate on the typical AAP schedule. They don't really have questions, or they ask questions. We go through them and answer them. About 12% want to go more slowly. They want to talk through things, and we are so happy to get to talk through those things with them, and they happily come back for their delayed vaccine schedule, and we're able to get them vaccines. And one of the things that really I'm proud about is a lot of these patients were turned down by other pediatric practices, and if they hadn't found us, they told us, we didn't have any other options. we would have just gone and seen some other type of healthcare clinician that didn't offer vaccines at all because we couldn't get anybody that would give us the time of day. And so we're really proud of that we're able to help. I just had a mom the other day who wanted to space vaccines. She wanted to build trust both in us as a practice, in the vaccines, that there weren't any big side effects that they noticed, and just the peace and comfort of mind of like working through all the things that she had heard and read on the internet. We did the 2-month vaccines, we split them up. We did the 4-month vaccines, we split them up. And then at the 6-month visit, she said, we did all of this and I feel really comfortable and safe, didn't have any side effects. I'd rather not have to come back again in a couple of weeks. Let's just do them on the regular routine now. This is a mom that otherwise was told, no, you're not welcome in our practice. No, if you don't sign on the dotted line and do what we say, you're going to have to leave our practice. Now, there's a few parents that are still waiting, or they've decided not for right now on vaccines. What I do with them is we talk through, okay, here's the science. I'm going to answer whatever questions you have. If I don't know the answer, I'm going to look up the answer and then we'll talk about it. In the meantime, here's what I need you to know that I would really like you to keep in mind. If your child gets a fever, if your child is exposed to this, that, or the other thing, here's what we're going to do. If we have a measles outbreak in town, I'm going to be texting you to say, hey, there's a measles outbreak in town. What are we going to do to keep little so-and-so safe when it comes to measles? And we'll come up with that plan. If we have a fever, here's what I'm going to do with you as a patient that is behind or not vaccinating right now to make sure that your child stays safe and doesn't experience harm that we could prevent. Whereas if your child was vaccinated, we would take a different approach when it comes to their 102 fever versus a child that is unvaccinated that I'm more worried about. We're just going to have a different approach. We talk through all those things and come up with a plan together. This is what shared decision-making looks like. It helps us to keep those infants and those children in the healthcare system that we believe in terms of not just vaccines, but all of the other aspects of healthcare that we provide, from sick visits to growth and development to screening them for other things or watching for other areas where outside of vaccines, they need a pediatrician's eyes, a pediatric practice's point of view and perspective and expertise to help them to continue to grow and thrive for all those different reasons. We don't want one disagreement because of a mountain of information that parents are trying to wade through to interfere with being able to help that family and help that child to thrive. The last question that a lot of parents have been asking about with vaccines is like, are they going to even be available? Is insurance going to cover them anymore? And my thought and prediction when it comes to vaccine availability and insurance coverage is that it's going to be unchanged despite these new recommendations and guidance. The reason for that is insurance companies care about profits. And they care about profits, and they care about profits. And they don't get paid by the vaccine manufacturers for giving the vaccines, but they do make a lot of money in not having to deal with a lot more sick children. 70,000 rotavirus hospital admissions per year is really expensive to pay the hospital for all of the care. And if they can approve and pay for the rotavirus vaccine, it's going to keep a lot of money in insurance companies' pockets to continue to support vaccines. And so I don't foresee that changing. Vaccines are a much cheaper option than hospitalizations for insurance companies, and I think that they're going to do that. And I also think that there is no new safety data that's driving these changes. So I don't think that there's going to be a change in availability because we don't have any safety data that's changed. It's more of an ideological, not a scientific shift in the approach to vaccines in the U.S. from the CDC. And so there isn't any new science that says, oh, we need to change lanes, or we need to change gears, or like I talked about earlier in this episode, we need to start recommending peanuts be given earlier, peanut butter and all those sorts of things to avoid that. We don't have any safety signals of concern. There's been no scientific changes that have led to these. And so that is why I think that insurance companies and vaccine manufacturers and everything will keep doing what they're doing despite these new recommendations. Whew, that was a lot. That was a kind of a big one to end on. Maybe I should have started with that one. I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has given you some new ideas and some new thoughts. I would love to continue the conversation. Dearparents.substack.com. Link is in the show notes to check out, to ask your questions, to continue on learning about your child, learning about pediatrics and parenting. And I would love it if you have more questions, if you would share those so that we can have more ideas for topics in upcoming episodes. Keep up the good work.